And most assuredly, we recognize that it is not. But notice the contrast that was just made. One side being concerned about love, the other side concerned about purity. I am just as concerned about love. And in fact, one of my greatest criticisms of Matt's position is that he never defines what love is. And he insists, and will within the next few minutes, insist that the love that exists between two homosexuals is identical to the love that exists in a married relationship between a man and a woman. And I remember exactly where I was on North New River Road this morning in the middle of a 70-mile bike ride when he said that. And thankfully, there's nothing out there but coyotes and lizards that heard me yelling, "No, it isn't," in between breaths as I was climbing a hill at that particular point in time. So this will be central to the discussion.
Are we continuing to uphold the Bible as authoritative? And are we taking biblical teachings seriously, even if they make us uncomfortable? I want to begin tonight by considering the traditional interpretation of Scripture on this subject, in part because its conclusions have a much longer history within the Church, and also because I think that many who adhere to that position feel that those who are arguing for a new position haven't yet put forth theological arguments that are as well grounded in Scripture as their own.
Well, as an individual who has written on this subject and who has, unfortunately, an entire section of pro-homosexual books in his library, however, I will admit, let's see, the same-sex controversy here is copyright 2002. It's 10 years old. And if I had had to keep up with what has been published in the past decade, it would be 3 times, 4 times the size that it is. I was amazed, even during the writing of the same-sex controversy, how many books came out even during that time. And I'll be honest with you, I haven't kept up with a lot of this stuff because as I listen to people like Matt today, they've not come up with anything new. There isn't anything new here. And, well, as we'll see, it's the other side that very rarely takes seriously the refutations that have been written of material, starting with John Boswell and others that have come since then. John Boswell's book, Christianity, Social Tolerance, and Homosexuality, is probably the main source for most of Matt's presentation, and certainly the books that he has that have been spawned by it all look back to Boswell as the scholarly rock upon which they stand. And refute Boswell, and you've refuted most of what they have to say, and we'll see that as we go along.
In which case, the most biblically sound position should prevail. The traditional interpretation, in summary form, is this. There are 6 passages in the Bible that refer in some way to same-sex behavior, and they are all negative. 3 of them are direct and clear. In the Old Testament, in Leviticus, male same-sex relations are prohibited and labeled an abomination. And in the New Testament, in Romans, Paul speaks of women, quote, exchanging natural relations for unnatural ones, and of men abandoning natural relations with women and committing shameful acts with other men. And so according to the traditional interpretation, both the Old and the New Testament are consistent in their rejection of same-sex relationships.
Now, I would want to add, as we did in our book, the fact that if you think that the issue of the Bible's teaching on homosexuality is solely or even primarily based upon the negative texts, Genesis 18 and 19, Leviticus 18 and 20, and then Romans chapter 1, 1 Corinthians chapter 6, and 1 Timothy chapter 1. Those 6 texts. There are others, some of the male temple prostitutes in the Old Testament, things like that, but those are the primary texts. If you think that the biblical argument relating to homosexuality is even primarily based upon those, you've missed the boat. Because the primary biblical argument is found in Matthew chapter 19 in Jesus' own teaching drawn from Genesis as to the nature of God's creative decree, the role of men and women And you must understand that those who, like Matt, consider themselves to be gay Christians do so, they take their position fundamentally through an overthrow of scriptural authority. Now, he's not going to specifically get into those issues, but I've never seen a Metropolitan Church of Christ that in the slightest bit demonstrates an understanding of the consistency of biblical teaching, especially in regards to positive biblical teaching in regards to marriage. I've just never seen it.
But it's not just those 3 verses, as well as 3 others that I'll come to later. It's true that 6 verses isn't all that many out of Scripture's 31,000. But not only are they all negative. From the traditional viewpoint, they gain broader meaning and coherence from the opening chapters of Genesis, in which God creates Adam and Eve, male and female. That was the original creation, before the fall, before sin entered the world. That was the way that things were supposed to be. And so according to this view, if someone is gay, then their sexual orientation is a sign of the fall, a sign of human fallenness and brokenness. That was not the way that things were supposed to be. And while having a same-sex orientation is not in and of itself a sin, according to the traditional interpretation, acting upon it is, because the Bible is clear both in what it negatively prohibits and in what it positively approves. Christians who are gay, those who are only attracted to members of the same sex, are thus called to refrain from acting on those attractions, to deny themselves, to take up their crosses, and to follow Christ. And though it may not seem fair to us, God's ways are higher than our own, and it's not our role to question, but to obey.
Now, I'm not sure I would have put it quite that way, but I think it is absolutely fair, it is absolutely appropriate throughout the course of this examination to replace same-sex attraction with other sinful attitudes and actions that the Scriptures represent to us, and see if the argumentation that Matt presents is not perfectly designed to overthrow the entirety of biblical morality.